podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Welcome back to Humans of Speedway, and in this episode I speak to somebody who once again has devoted their entire life really to Speedway. Helen Charlesworth is a writer and an author. She's contributed to a couple of programmes, particularly at Plymouth and at Newcastle. She's also an author. She's written a couple of Speedway novels, one of which features Jason Doyle in a time-travelling epic. We'll hear more about that fairly soon. As we head towards Halloween at the time of producing this particular episode, how about an actual Speedway ghost story? More details about that to come as well. And of course, Helen chooses her Speedway Paradise too, all-time 1 to 7 at the all-time location, and it's definitely a battle of the Speedway eras. Pudding bowl helmets versus the latest technology. Who will win? Uprights versus laydowns. We'll hear that battle in full between now and the end. But it gives me great pleasure to welcome to Humans of Speedway, Helen Charlesworth.
Thank you for inviting me on your show, Ian. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
So let's talk about your history in Speedway then, because everybody starts somewhere and gets involved in the sport somehow. So how did you come to end up in the wonderful world of Speedway in the first place?
I first went to Speedway at Newcastle Park in the summer of 1976. I'd just had my 11th birthday, so I was old enough to go. I had been begging to go since, I think, the year before. Newcastle opened up in 1975. There'd been a few years gap, they'd obviously ran since 1929. I wasn't around then, of course. But I'd been into bikes for years. When I was 7, I used to go out on the back of my dad's motorbike. And I think when they opened in 1975, my friend Susan at school, she went with her dad, and I was so envious. I'd seen it on World of Sport, I think the programme was, and I'd read about it in the newspapers, and I begged and begged to be able to go. So, like I say, I just turned 11, and my parents let my sister take me to the Speedway. And it was the most exciting thing I'd ever done up till that point in my life. It was just... I went in the stadium, it was huge, loads of people, and then when the bike started and the noise, and when you've fallen in love, That's how I felt. I really did. It was just this over-excitement. It's like, this is wonderful, this is what I've been dreaming of. It was just what I thought it would be.
And it's not so much as well just purely the excitement of the racing, it's the whole atmosphere that you find that you get consumed by. Did you find that as well?
Yeah, well, I remember when I first used to go, there's a metal fence at Newcastle that you have to stand behind, and there's the greyhound track, then the track. And I remember I kept finding myself on the wrong side of this metal fence. I don't know how. I think I must have been sitting on it, and I'd climb over one of these marshal guys who go around and keep telling us to get back to the other side. And you just I must have been trying to get closer and closer to the track without realising it.
You went along for the first time, and obviously that wasn't the last time you went, because you, as you say, you were consumed by it, and you kept getting drawn back week after week.
Yeah, I think that first meeting I went to was Crayford. I don't know when they closed, crikey.
Wow.
Yeah, it was Crayford Kestrels, and I wore a little T-shirt with a heart with Joe on. Joe Owen, he was my hero at the time. I remember I got a Joe Owen rosette that night, and I was allowed to go for the rest of the summer holidays.
Wow.
But then when we went back to school, I wasn't allowed to go because it was a Monday night, school night.
Yeah.
And then I started going again regularly the following season. And I remember I didn't miss a home meeting right through about 1983.
Obviously, you've got a Newcastle accent, and you went to Newcastle when you first started getting involved in Speedway. But now we speak to you, and you're based down on the south coast, but you found Speedway down there as well now. Tell us about the Plymouth setup then, because it is a long way to go for people in the far north. People like myself, I think the longest away trip in football, and probably in Speedway as well, would be the trip from Newcastle down to Plymouth. I think that's the furthest you can go in sporting fixtures. So you have pretty much gone as far as you can. But what is it like down there, and how are things on the Speedway scene?
Plymouth's got a great track. It's small, and I think sometimes when people come and look at it, they think, wow, it's tiny. I know that was my first impression of it. But it's got some fantastic racing. There's lots of passing, and a lot of riders who come here say that they really love the Plymouth track. I think, like you say, the only problem is it's so far away. And with the weekend tourism travel in the holiday season, in the summer, it can make that journey down the M5 and A38 quite horrendous at times. Mark Phillips, the promoter, and his team of helpers have done an amazing amount of work on the stadium over the past few seasons, and have really transformed it, because when it started it was just a track and a field. That's all we had. But this year he's put a lot of work into it, and it's such a shame people haven't been there to see it. We've had 2 meetings this season, but he's put in a new home straight stand with seating. He's put lighting in for the where the spectator area is. A hell of a lot has gone towards improving the spectator experience. And in Plymouth we've got quite a large Polish community. Put a barbecue into the stadium, so that might encourage a few more Polish people to come, bring along a few friends.
When we talk about obviously not being able to go to meetings, some meetings have been happening, and at the time of recording will be happening as well, increasingly, as people get used to how to do live streaming, which is probably one of the good things, I think, to come out of 2020 as far as Speedway is concerned, and people thinking about how they're going to do that. And Plymouth are one of the clubs that have gone down that route.
Yeah, Plymouth's first meeting this season a couple of weeks ago, it was because there was only, they were only allowed 400 people in. A lot more people wanted to go. It was a 3-team tournament between Plymouth, Isle of Wight and Eastbourne. So you've had fans from 3 clubs wanting to attend. And because the limit was 400, the guys from the Speedway chat show, I don't know if you've heard of that, it's Jerry Sims, Shane Childs, and they had Andy Haig on camera. They live streamed the meeting, and it was fantastic. I couldn't actually go to the meeting. I was away on holiday that week, the 1 week I've had on holiday all year, and it was a week of that meeting, so I watched it from a tent in Cornwall. But the live stream was absolutely brilliant. Yeah, and it's good, that I don't know how many people signed up to it, but all those people couldn't get to the meeting. Yes, it's a great thing, this live streaming. Hopefully it'll happen more often, because there's a lot of people who live too far away from a track to get to. They've got other commitments that they can't go, and I'm sure they'd happily pay.
Yeah, I think the concern in some quarters perhaps is the fact that if you do live streaming, people will stay at home and they won't turn up to the stadium. But I don't think that is the actual case. I think all you're doing is you're giving Speedway to people who can't go. You're not replacing people who otherwise would go with them deciding to stay at home.
Yeah, because there's nothing beats actually being there.
Exactly.
Is it? It's still brilliant, but it's not as good. But, as the live action. But yeah, because there are people who, they just can't go for whatever reason. And if maybe some of that live streaming money went back into the club, then they'll still benefit from it.
You've been involved with both Plymouth and Newcastle in a couple of ways, but you've been involved in with their programmes because you are a writer, and I know that you write about all sorts of things, which we'll touch on in a moment. But you as far as Speedway is concerned, you've been involved in writing programmes, articles for programmes, columns, and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, it started off back in 2015. My friend Roy Clark up in Newcastle, he contacted me and said, would I write a one-off column for the Matchday magazine? They were looking for fans to write, maybe something about a meeting that they'd been to, favourite rider, just something to do with Speedway. So I said, yeah, okay then, I'll do it. I did a one-off. And then a week later I was asked if I would do it every week. So I said, oh, well, okay then. But then it sort of rolled on the next season. It was, oh, can you do it again? Can you do it again? And it went from a column, it went to a whole page. And their magazine's quite big as well, so a whole page was quite a lot to think of something interesting every week. But actually, I found it quite easy.
Yeah? Yeah,
because I was looking up about Speedway in the past. That's how it got into my books, actually. Reading about the old days, pre-war, whatever. And I was finding some absolutely fantastic articles. I'm like, people want to know this. So I was writing those. I'd maybe write about a meeting that I'd been to. just some funny story around Speedway. But I think like after a couple of years, it was starting to run a bit thin. Like, oh, what stories can I find now? But anyway, then I think it was 2018. I offered to help Plymouth with the programme. So started out again doing the same thing, writing a story. And then the following season, I ended up writing all the articles. So I was writing the stories, like the away team, quizzes, interviews, word searches. So it just sort of slowly started to snowball, where I started with a column and I ended up writing a programme each week.
Yeah, that's kind of media in general. You start off helping out, and before you know it, you're running the joint. That's just that's kind of how it works, I think. Yeah, and because you are a bit of a sort of historian as well, or certainly with an interest in history, aren't you? So obviously that would naturally appeal to you, merging the two.
Yeah, but I had to sort of sometimes think, I need to write about something a little bit more up to date, because I could get so involved in researching things from the past, and think not everybody wants to know these stories.
Yeah. So what are some of the notable stories that spring to mind then that you've written in these programs?
I think the ones that I've probably enjoyed writing most have probably been the pre-war stories. When Speedway was so glamorous, it was bigger than football, and I remember writing one about entertainment, like interval entertainment, sorry. And Johnny Hoskins up at Newcastle, he would get the riders out to sing, and Newcastle had a Canadian rider called Eric Chitty, and he'd get Eric to come out and sing to the fans. It was called A Ditty from Chitty. So that would be the interval entertainment. And there was an American rider called Putt Mossman. He was a Speedway rider, but he was also a stunt motorcyclist, and he put on shows. So he would come to tracks. I know he came to Plymouth. He'd take part in the meeting, and then after the meeting, he'd bring out his entourage that he had with him. I think it involved his sister, who drove some sort of car. I don't know what she did, but he'd put a ladder on the back of the bike, and he'd ride around the track, climbing from one side of the ladder to the other, while steering it with his feet and juggling balls. And he'd jump through burning hoops and just these other crazy antics. And, I remember as a kid, there'd be like end of season jinx,
yes,
but you wouldn't have things like that. One of the strangest stories I've ever come across, and this is actual fact. I know people think, oh, it's been passed on, and people have changed it or whatever, but they haven't. This was in the newspaper at the time. There was a rider called Roy Reeves. He was from Plymouth, but he rode for Exeter, and on the 21st of September he was riding up at Leicester's Meldon Road Stadium, and he was involved in a crash where he suffered a fatal head injury. 48 hours after the accident, it was the night before the inquest, his wife, along with a friend and his two mechanics, they visited the stadium. And it was dark. It was probably about 8-9 o'clock, around about the time of night that he died. And as they were walking around the track and got to the spot where Roy had met with his accident, they saw him standing in front of them.
No.
Yeah, he was smiling at them, and he was dressed in his leathers, had his crash helmet and whatever on. And his wife Dorothy and this Cyril chap, they stopped. Like, they'd seen him, and then from behind of them they heard a cry, and it was one of the mechanics. He was leaning on the safety fence sobbing. He'd seen him as well. And then Roy spoke to his wife and told her he wanted to wear one of his medals. He wanted her mother to wear another medal, and for his favourite to be buried with him. The other guys there hadn't heard him speaking because of so much shock, but his friend Cyril said he could see the mouth moving, but he couldn't hear what Roy said. It was, just his mouth. And they were just in absolute shock. They went back to where they were staying. And the following day at the inquest, one of the mechanics couldn't attend. He was so ill, he couldn't even get out of bed because of what he'd seen. Apparently, Roy Reeves had been very much into spiritualism and had often spoken about it to his friends. And I actually believe he did communicate one final time with them.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was in the newspapers within, a few days of it happening. It's not a story that's been passed down and little bits added for effect. They did see him. I've actually visited his grave. He's buried with his mother in St George's Churchyard in Modbury, Devon, just about 15 miles away from here.
Blimey, a Speedway ghost story.
Yeah.
I didn't expect that.
No, you'd think it would be one of those stories that people would have known about, because it's something like that is quite phenomenal.
Well, I'm keeping that for Halloween.
Oh.
They used to get up to all sorts of stuff, though, in those days. I know we did that episode with Peter Oakes, and he was talking about back at Liverpool, a rider coming out with rockets on the back of his bike and things like that. And things were definitely different back then, weren't they?
Johnny Hoskins was one for putting entertainment on. He'd have riders racing it against greyhounds, and they'd have cheetah racing. And the last meeting of 1939, he'd said that the following week he was going to have George Pepper with cheetahs chasing him around the track. But it didn't happen because war broke out.
Phew, thank goodness for that.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the first time I've ever thought there was a good job war broke out. Saved by World War II, otherwise you're going to have Speedway riders eaten by cheetahs as halftime entertainment.
I know, can you imagine it, them? They're penned in their cages in the pits waiting to go out.
Just like the Romans used to do. I mean, it's been done before. Fantastic stuff. And when it comes to writing, you've done, well, you've written all sorts of different things, but you have written some books on Speedway as well, and two of yours in particular, Dirt Tracks and Shrapnel Scars, and Speedway Boys and the Skid Kids. I mean, what sort of books are these, and what was your inspiration behind them?
I wrote books that I wanted to read. I read a lot of books on Speedway, but most of them, they're either autobiographies, biographies, or facts and figures. And I really wanted to read a story. So why not write one yourself? And I also, because I like history, time travel, a whole lot of it, bag it up together. So these stories are about two teenage boys, Joel Armstrong and Will Roberts, and they both share a love of Speedway, but it's in different eras.
Uh-huh.
So in the first book, well, in both of them, Jason Doyle is Joel's all-time Speedway hero.
Okay.
But when he mentions this to Will said he'd never heard of Jason. His favourite rider was Cordy Milne, and he first watched Speedway in 1936. So the story basically is Joel had gone to spend a week's summer holidays with his grandparents in Plymouth. And while his grandfather was doing some renovations, he came across a small glass lens, likely from an old-fashioned pair of wireframe spectacles. And this lens becomes Joel's portal to the past. His key to the portal to the past. His gran sends him off to deliver something to a friend in the next street, but that is also part of the portal. So every time he goes to this house, he goes through the portal. But of course, when he goes through, he's not meeting the lady he's supposed to. He goes through and he meets this boy, Will. It's Will's house in the 1940s. And at first he thinks this whole 1940s thing's a big hoax, but soon realises that when he sees the Luftwaffe bomb damage for himself and gets caught up in the Blitz, that this is real. And he begins to make regular visits to the past.
So he is visiting a friend, but they don't realise that he's going back in time to meet him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So prior to his visits to the past, Joe's always been a bit of a dreamer. He's always imagined himself with Jason Doyle, the really good buddies. They're travelling to away meetings. He's helping him out in the pits. And even when he's in war-torn Plymouth, he still daydreams about Jason a lot. Okay,
and is Jason Doyle aware that he features as a character in one of the only Speedway novels that certainly I know of?
Yes, he does.
He does?
Yes, Jason is aware. And also a few other riders play key roles in it.
Oh, okay. Who else is in it then?
Well, we've got some from the past.
Yeah.
George Pepper, Bluey Wilkinson. But I've had Adam Roynan and Tim Webster and Matty Bates all gave me permission to have them play themselves in the book.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so they are characters and they're aware. They've got the books. They know that they're in there. Yeah, a few of the riders get minor starring roles. Ben Morley, Nicky Pedersen. It's not a book about name dropping. There's
No,
a
no, no.
specific reason that they're in there. They're in there for a reason, you know.
Yeah, I was just wondering if if they were aware that they're in it, and obviously they are. So and what was their reaction when you asked Adam Roynan and Jason Doyle and the like if they minded having their names in the book?
Well, Jason, I didn't tell him till just before I was going to publish it, but I said if you don't want to be in, then I'll change it. But I didn't hear back, so I'm presuming he's quite happy with it.
Okay.
And I know he's retweeted things, that mention the book, so he's obviously happy with it.
Okay,
and
yeah.
He's a wonderful character in it. He is the hero.
Okay.
Adam, great, yeah. Adam, Tim, Matty, brilliant. Yeah, I think they're quite honoured to be in it.
Yeah, it's it's an unusual thing to be part of, I suppose, isn't it, as well? And a bit of immortality for them in literature.
Definitely.
Okay, and these books are available now. Let's get on to the shameless plug section because if people want to read your Speedway novels, how do they get hold of them?
They're both available, as are my other books, on Amazon, and you can buy them as a paperback or as a download. And as a download, you don't have to have a Kindle. It can be to a mobile phone, a computer, whatever.
Okay, and if you just search out Helen Charlesworth on Amazon, all your books should probably come up, I would think, yeah?
Yeah, they will do, yeah.
You're listening to Humans of Speedway. I'm Ian Brannan. My guest in this episode is Helen Charlesworth, a lifelong Speedway fan, but also a Speedway writer as well. She's written 2 novels, as you're just talking about there, one which features Jason Doyle and Adam Roynan, among other riders, a time-travelling Speedway epic, and also written for many programmes as well. And in your course of doing that, you've done many great interviews. In fact, I might put you in charge of getting guests for this podcast because the big Emil Sayfutdinov exclusive.
Yeah, that was really lucky. I'd always been a fan of Emil since he came onto this Speedway scene. Well, obviously been on the Speedway scene a lot longer, but when we became aware of him, I think it was probably about 2009. I contacted Emil not long after Russia had become Speedway of Nations World Champions, and despite a really hectic racing schedule that week, he got back to me within 24 hours and he said, yeah, go ahead, send over the questions. And I know that week he was racing in Poland. I think he had a Grand Prix at the end of the week, and then he was back in Poland. So, I didn't even expect an answer, really, never mind so quick. But I sent over the questions, and again, within 24 hours, he'd emailed back all his responses. Brilliant.
Wow.
Absolutely lovely guy to deal with. Very genuine, very open and honest. Yeah, what a gentleman.
I know that fan clubs are a very big thing. Used to be maybe a bigger thing in certainly the 80s and 70s and stuff. Maybe they're not quite so much now, but I guess we have groups and social media that act in that same space now. But you have been a member of a number of fan clubs. I was in a few fan clubs as well. I mean, I was in the Weetabix fan club. Also one for a few Speedway rides as well, as we'll discuss. I mean, what are your memories of Speedway fan clubs in particular?
I joined quite a few fan clubs when I was a kid. I think a lot of it was because it was the only way you got to know about what was going on at other tracks. Other than the Speedway Star or the Speedway Mail, or maybe the odd item in the newspaper, you didn't really know what would be going on. Whereas today, everything's online, isn't it? So I think the first fan club I joined was Joe Owen. He was my hero. And Robbie Blackadder, another Newcastle rider. I also was a member of Kenny Carter's, Les Collins, he was at Bellevue, Dave Allen at Boston, and Rob Woofenden at Scunthorpe. I've got an interesting story about Rob Woofenden actually.
Okay.
When I was 17, I went down to Scunthorpe to watch them take on Newcastle, and I must have let his fan club secretary Julie know that I was coming down. Anyway, at the interval, Rob came onto the centre green, and then the next thing I heard my name called out over the tannoy, and it said to go to the start gate. Oh my, I wondered what was happening next. Why had I been called to the start gate? Why was Rob on the centre green? What had happened? Julie, the fan club secretary, had arranged for me to present Rob with a new bike cover paid for by his fan club. Oh, I was so embarrassed.
Wow.
I was really shy. And I remember going on to the centre green, handing it over. Rob gave me a little kiss on the cheek, and then the track photographer took a photograph of us. But I just went back off into the crowd. I never saw the photo. Anyway, we'll move on to 2006. Rob and Sue brought Ty over to the UK to have try his hand at Speedway and see if it was worth making a career out of it.
Yeah.
But we know it was.
Probably was in the end, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, this particular evening, I was in the pits at Plymouth, was standing at the back of the van, and Rob was opposite me. He was loading up Ty's van. And I just thought, I can't let this opportunity pass. I've got to speak to him because I'm not shy now as I was when I was younger. Anyway, I told him about being a fan of his and his Stags and Potters Day. And we got chatting about his fan club. And I mentioned that when I was 17, whilst visiting Scunthorpe as a Newcastle Diamonds fan, how Julie had arranged for me to present him with a bike cover. And a few weeks later, Scunthorpe were at Plymouth again. And again, I got chatting to Rob. And he said he thought about what I'd said the last time he'd seen me, and he remembered it.
Wow.
Yeah, and he said his mum still had that photograph of us together. So I've never seen it, but it's probably out there somewhere, yeah.
And we talk more about Rob Woofenden and a bit more detail with his former mechanic, in fact, Neil Machin. Used to be the promoter at Sheffield, of course, but he was big pals with Rob Woofenden. You can hear that in a previous episode we did, I think episode 4, where he talks about spending time with Rob Woofenden, going around tracks and being his spanner man. Another rider that you did know pretty well personally was Kenny Carter. Now, Kenny Carter's legend obviously tarnished by what happened at the end, and obviously we're not going to ignore that or indeed condone it. But prior to that, he was one of the most talked about, exciting riders that Britain had produced in a long time. Undoubtedly would have been world champion, and a rider that you got to know quite well.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, a lot of people maybe avoid the subject of talking about Kenny because of that. But we have to look at the person before. My personal experience of Kenny was that he really appreciated his fans, especially the younger ones. I think he was really good with kids. I remember the first time I went up to him and got his autograph, and I said, "Oh, can you put to Helen on it?" And then I think after about the second or third time of asking him, he remembered my name, and he'd always put on to Helen of Kenny Carter. And we weren't just these faceless little kids queuing up for autographs, where sometimes I think with some riders they don't even look at you, they sign it and they would hand it back to kids. Mm-hmm. But with him, he appreciated us just as much as we loved to watch him race. He moved on to Halifax full-time the following year, but in our hearts he was always a diamond. He was always our Kenny. He was always a duke. No, well, I'll tell you more. He was always a diamond. So back then I didn't really know Kenny to chat to, but it was to go up and get autographs and whatever. And he was really nice to his kids. I remember a meeting towards the end of the 1981 season. So that was just after Bruce Pennell had won the world title at Wembley. And him and Kenny had been invited to Newcastle to take part in 3 match races against each other. So as well as the main meeting, you had Kenny and Bruce in these separate one-off races. Kenny won the first one, and then Bruce took the win in the next 2 races. And then at the interval, I think there was maybe a collection or something being held, and Bruce and Kenny came out into the crowd, and they were mobbed. They were absolutely mobbed. And they, talking on a microphone and everything to the fans. That was fantastic. That was really good night. And Kenny, like I say, he was always a diamond. He came up to supporters club events a couple of times. I think he once came up for a quiz night, and another time to one of the discos. I think it was about 1983 when he came up to one of the discos, because he had Pam with him. And I remember she said that her mum was babysitting Kelly Marie for them. But what I distinctly remember about is when Kenny came in, his eyes were eagerly looking everywhere, wanted to see who he recognised. It wasn't like he was then, look at me, look who I am. It was like he was looking around to see who he knew. And there was something about Kenny, I think, that it was as if he never really felt Kenny Carter was good enough.
Really?
Kenny Carter didn't. Yeah, there was something about him that he. What do you think? When he was in the World Finals, he was always one of these, he could be world champion. He finished 5th.
Yeah.
And like he would say, who remembers who finishes 2nd? But he finished 5th. That's just way down. And I think he really thrived on needing to be wanted, but also to please.
Being such a huge fan of Kenny's, though, how did you feel on that day in May 1986 when the news came out that Kenny had taken not only his own life, but the life of his wife, Pamela, as well? Obviously, a huge tragedy, a shock for a lot of people because it made the national news, but particularly for, I imagine, someone like yourself who was so very close to Kenny as a fan.
Shocked. I mean, we all knew Kenny had problems, emotional problems, but it was just awful. It was hard to believe. I think it took a long time for everybody to digest. And then you're looking back, well, could he have been helped more? What could the people around him have done? Don't know. It's just awful. I don't think it's something that anybody will ever really understand.
This is Humans of Speedway. I'm Ian Brannan. My guest is Speedway writer, lifelong fan, historian, and, well, lots more besides, including an author of novels involving Speedway, Helen Charlesworth. Right now, though, we're going to call on Helen's experience of Speedway to see if we can design her dream meeting in our Speedway Paradise feature. So what we'll do is we'll ask you the first question, Helen, and if you're going to design your dream meeting, which track would you be racing it on?
You like this, Ian. Halifax.
Yes, come on. Yeah.
Definitely Halifax track. Magic memories of there. I love the place. I loved it, should I say.
Yeah. I mean,
I will have the smell of coal in the air as well.
Yes, it was.
Yes.
And I mean, we're sort of talking beyond this particular question, I guess, here now. But, it was for people who never went to the Shay, Halifax is a very rugged location in terms of, I always remember the hillsides surrounding it. It had these sort of moors kind of around the top of Halifax that you could always see, and then the stadium down in the town in a valley, and it's sort of in quite an imposing location, really.
There was something very earthy about it. I loved the place, and like I said, that smell of coal that would hang in the air. I remember that. Maybe it was because it was a sort of a heavy night, so maybe it drew it in. But yeah, that was so. Yeah, my track, definitely Halifax.
Halifax, big banked corners. I suppose the nearest thing now, and something like Berwick, I suppose, would be a similar kind of track, wouldn't it? But
yeah, they've got big banking.
Yeah. The stadium that you'd put that track in, then, if you could have any, based on the facilities, the stands, anything else that you sort of really care to include. I mean, which stadium would we put the Shays track in?
Got to put it in Wembley with its twin towers.
Oh, yes.
Big stadium, capacity crowd.
Because Wembley's track was very flat, wasn't it? The track that they did have in there when they did do Speedway. I think it was fairly flat.
I went for the 81 World Final, but I don't remember a lot about it, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, that's what people say. People say about the 81 World Final being a terrific World Final, but then you ask them what they can remember for it, and not actually that much.
I remember at the end taking off my Tommy Knudsen rosette because I'd wanted Tommy to win, and he didn't. I remember taking that off. That's probably actually talking about Wembley. I was telling one of my friends a few years back, Keith, about the meeting, and he went, "I was with you," and were you? He said, "Yeah, I was standing next to you and your sister." Didn't even remember that.
Right.
That's how much I remember about it.
that memorable meeting, 1981. Yeah. What happened? Nobody knows. Something to do with Bruce Pennell. Okay, let's move on to the team then. You're 1 to 7. Now, this can be any rider from any era, alive or not. No points limits. It's blank canvas. So I'll leave it over to you then, Helen. Who's going to be first?
Right. Well, what I've done, I've chosen riders from different eras.
Okay.
And I'd like to imagine the fan base in the stadium to be a mixture of the same different decades too. When air horns, wooden rattles, pork pie hats, woolly bobble hats, anoraks and team colours.
Excellent.
Badges, patches, wolf sport jacket. So you can picture now the sort of team I'm going to have.
Okay.
And it's uprights versus laydowns, leathers versus Kevlars.
Well, Upright Speedway is about this.
Yeah. Right. My number one is Bluey Wilkinson. Bluey was a 1938 world champion. He actually won the meeting with a broken collarbone. He'd broken it, I think, the night before, and he got a doctor to plaster his arm and shoulder to hold it in place. And he went out and raced through the pain barrier to get the win. In the first ever world final in 1936, he was third, and he missed out on the 37 championship altogether because he had a broken wrist. So you can, tell what sort of rider he was.
I mean, that's very interesting because we've had people before sort of do teams full of world champions, but they've always been sort of what you'd probably class as modern era riders. I mean, forgetting the fact that maybe, we have had world champions going back to pre-war. It's...
The first one was 1936.
Wow, okay.
But we never got to find out how good Bluey could really be because he retired in 1939. He was only about 27. He took on the role of promoter at Sheffield, and then he was sadly killed in a street motorcycle accident in 1940 back in Australia.
Blimey, I never knew that. So there you go. A history lesson for us all as well.
Mm.
So Bluey Wilkinson then, first out.
Yeah. And do you know why he was called Bluey?
I would
Come on, Ian.
I would hasten to guess. I'll leave it to you. What's that?
Because he had red hair.
Oh. It's
an Australian thing.
Right.
Mm.
Well, at least it's only that.
Yeah.
Okay. Who's at number two then?
Number two, my childhood hero, Joe Owen.
Yes.
Joe Owen had the best leathers ever, and I'm really surprised nobody's tried to replicate them. There were his sort of 76, 77 era ones, black and white, checkered shoulders, stars on the legs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Classic. I did a poll actually a couple of weeks ago on social media about who would you like to appear on this podcast.
Joe Owen.
There was a lot of people saying Joe Owen.
Mm.
Yeah.
Whenever I hear his name mentioned or I see a picture of him, it just gives me that lovely warm feeling. Back nice. Then, he was my absolute hero. Brilliant. It was such a shame that his career was cruelly cut short, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Track crash in 85.
Yeah.
Absolutely awful.
Well, let's see if we can track him down, though.
Oh, yes. Definitely. Right, number three.
Mm-hmm. Simon
Wigg.
You see, when you said wolf sport jackets, I did think Simon Wigg.
Oh, did you? He was a brilliant all-round motorcyclist, very colourful character. He'd really do wheelies over the finish line. And he won a multitude of speedway and long track, grass track trophies. Amazing guy.
Yeah, again, another personality of the sport and a nice guy with it. I remember him for riding at Bradford. Obviously, he rode for a number of clubs, but I remember him riding at Bradford, and he was just he was just such a nice kind of approachable personality. When you were stood at the pits as a youngster getting autographs and stuff, he was again another one of those who would always come over and have his photo taken or give you the autograph, no problems. It was all smiles.
He's like Mr. Sunshine, I think.
Yeah.
So I would see him. And the bright green leathers. But he was Mr. Sunshine. He was blonde hair, big teeth, lovely sunny character.
You'd always see his van outside the Chinese afterwards as
well. Oh, is he?
Bradford, yeah, on the way home. Okay, so Simon Wigg in the team. Absolutely great addition. Who's next?
Number 4 is Jason Doyle.
Ah, yes, the time traveller.
Got to have him in, as well as being the hero in my Speedway books. He's also a rider I've watched regularly riding at Plymouth, because when we were in the Premier League, we were regularly riding against Somerset, or we'd go up there. So, I saw him numerous times. But got a little story about Jason. He probably doesn't want this one to be on.
Oh, aye. Go on then.
The first ever meeting he rode at Plymouth, this was back in 2006, and it was an interleague challenge between the Isle of Wight Islanders, as they were then called, and Plymouth. Plymouth were in the Conference League, they were Premier. Jason was the lowest point scorer of the night. He scored nil point.
Oh, dear.
Oh, he just had the most awful meeting. I can't remember the full details now, but I think he got excluded, fell off, possibly had engine failure. He was just really, really unlucky that night. And I remember him standing down near the pit gate having a rant with somebody. I think he got excluded. But yeah, that really was a bad meeting for him. And I'm sorry, Jason. I really am.
Not one for the record books.
No. It's strange to think, because even back when he was riding Premier level, you never looked at him as being a future world champion, did you? He was a very good rider, but domestic league. What happened to make the Jason Doyle, who was just a very good league rider, become this world champion, this rider who's, still he's up there at the top? I'd love to know what it was, that defining moment in his life that made him push that bit further.
Okay, so Jason Doyle is in the team. We've got a few more left. Who else are you going to put in your all-time team?
Number 5 has got to be the Russian rocket, Emil Sayfutdinov.
Ah, yes. Well, you've spoken about your like for Emil.
Yeah. Everybody who's met him says how lovely he is. He goes around shaking everybody's hand. He's just such a nice guy. And he did say to me that the Russian Federation just never helped him. They'd never helped him at all. And I thought it was really sad, how far he's got without the Russians backing him and supporting him. It's amazing, absolutely amazing. He doesn't live there. He lives in Bydgoszcz now.
Oh, okay, in Poland. Yeah.
I think he said he went back occasionally to see his mum and his brother. His brother rode for a while, but his brother runs a car detailing business back in Russia.
So that's Emil Sayfutdinov. You've got a couple more left. Who would you add to your all-time lineup then for this?
Number 6, I think, got to have Ty Wuffenden.
Yeah.
3 times world champion. And when he was 16, people would go, oh, he's going to be a future world champion. And they've said that about lots of people. But, he did 3 times.
And maybe more.
Who knows?
Maybe more. Yeah. Even this year, who knows yet? But, yeah.
Just a shame that he doesn't ride in the UK anymore. And, it makes you wonder, will he ever?
Yeah, I guess we'll see in the fullness of time, I suppose, on how things pan out on that front. But
yeah, hopefully
never say never.
Well, look at Jason Doyle and Nicky Pedersen were going to ride here this year, weren't they?
Yeah, and
so yeah, maybe Ty can be enticed back.
And Jason Crump as well, of course, who is back here. But I think it looks like most of those teams are going to be ready for next year as well. That's got to be good news. So we will hopefully get to see them eventually. And one last place left then. Who's it going to be? Right,
my number 7 goes to George Pepper. You've never heard of him, Ian, have you?
No, but you did mention him, I think, earlier.
I did. He was the 1939 captain of the Newcastle Diamonds. He was a Canadian. He's in my book, but what also made me choose him is because during the Second World War, he didn't go back to Canada like a lot of riders did. They went back home. He stayed. He joined the RAF. He was a pilot, and he was an air ace. George Pepper's brother came over with him from Canada, Jim, his kid brother Jim, and he acted as his mechanic. And in the winter of 1939, what the plans had been was that they would both play ice hockey for Edinburgh, because they played ice hockey back in in Canada. But when war broke out, because all sport stopped, they both joined the RAF. And George Pepper was killed in a training accident in 1942, November 1942. He took a plane up for a test flight with 2 other guys on board, and they were all killed. It crashed to the ground, went up in flames. And then a year later, his kid brother Jim was killed. He'd been on a sortie over Berlin. They were flying back, and the plane got hit, and it crash landed at some little island just off Holland.
And I'm reading here as well that he was a very accomplished motorcyclist in general, George Pepper, because he also won the Canadian Championship 200-mile road race in 1936 as well, which was around the city streets of Ontario. So he was like a road racer that crossed over into Speedway.
Yeah, it was Belleville, Ontario. That's the town that he comes from. He won the road race there, and the townsfolk put the money together to get him to sail over to Liverpool and then over to the Isle of Man to take part in the TT race in 1937.
Wow! So it was a well-known, motorcycle star really of the era.
Yeah, he's in the Hall of Fame there.
Yeah.
I actually spoke to his family last year. We set up a conference call thing, and I was hoping to speak to his son, but his son had a flood in his house that day and couldn't make it. But I got to speak to Jamie Pepper, his nephew or great nephew, and a couple of the other family, which was lovely because I was sharing with them the stories that I'd found out about George, and they were giving me the stories. It was lovely.
Yeah, really interesting. Nice bit of history in this episode as well. So that's your team then, cracking team from all eras, and with pudding basing helmets versus things are a little bit more up to date. So we'd have to see who'd win that one. When it comes to referee for your dream meeting, then which referee would you choose?
Fast Frank Ebden. Very good at getting through meetings quickly. He won't put up with them faffing about.
Well, yeah. Was it the Shane Parker episode? Shane Parker said Frank Ebden would be the referee not doing it.
Oh, really? Well, Shane Parker's not my lineup, is he?
No.
He hasn't got anything to worry about.
Yeah, I think Shane likes a bit more time over his meetings, I see. But yeah, Fast Frank, notorious for getting meetings done. And one rule then you would change while we're on the subject of referees. If you could have a tamper with the rule book, what would you fiddle with?
Stop constantly changing the rules. I think to do the start and gate, these false starts and restarts, that can drag a meeting on and you lose interest. That maybe bringing a laser across the start line, so it would show if a rider, if they're all lined up, the laser would show if somebody has moved. That's what I bring in. A laser.
Yes, a laser.
Not Star Wars type thing. Yeah. Red laser light.
Like a massive lightsaber across it, and if you go over, your wheel just vanishes.
It melts.
Yeah. That'll keep them still. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have one that melts the wheels.
Okay. Zero tolerance. Darth Vader as the start marshal, perhaps. Maybe that would do it.
Yeah.
And a team from any time in history, any league in the world, to be the opposition for your dream team. Now, I suspect you might be considering somebody from or a team from years past. I don't know, but I'll leave it over to you then. Which complete team would you have as the opposition?
I'm going to surprise you a little bit here. And I'm going to go just down the road a bit to Poole. I am going to have the Poole 2013 team.
Okay, that's a relatively new one. I'm surprised. I thought you'd be going back to 19 whatever. But
yeah.
Okay.
Well, that year in their lineup they had Darcy Ward, Magic Janowski, Greg Hancock, Chris Holder, Josh Grajanek, Rowan Tungate.
Yeah.
Brilliant lineup. So yeah, that's my team, and I think it'd be pretty competitive.
I think so.
Two different teams. Yeah.
Absolutely. Back to the Turbo Twins era.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Well, we can only wonder who would win that meeting, and while we do that, we'll say thank you very much for joining us, Helen. It's been great speaking with you, and if anybody wants to get hold of any of your books, of course, Helen Charlesworth, look you up on Amazon, and they can see all the things that you've written about Speedway as well. And thank you very much, Ian, for having me on your show. It's been brilliant to speak to you. My thanks then to Helen Charlesworth, guest on this episode of Humans of Speedway. Don't forget you can check out the previous episodes if you're a new subscriber. There's plenty more to get your ears round, including chats with Nigel Pearson. We've also got Shane Parker in there, Phil Morris, the race director of the Speedway Grand Prix and the Speedway of Nations. He's all featured in a previous episode. And don't forget, you can look us up on social media too. Give us a follow on Twitter. We are at Speedway Humans, and on Facebook, just search out Humans of Speedway. And coming soon, another episode. We've got some great shows lined up for you, and we'll speak to you very soon here on Humans of Speedway.
Social Podcast Network.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.